recognize this menacing old school tune? I bet most of you watching actually do, and if you said that's the Imperial March track from Star Wars, then you'd be absolutely correct. But that was also an easy one. Let's try again and see if you can guess this one. Well then, what piece of music was that? Here I bet most of you would probably reuse your answer from the last round, but in this case, you'd be wrong. This is from the beginning of another track from the same movie called The Asteroid Field. So, what's up with this? Is it just two different tracks that happen to have a very similar melody in them? Well, of course not. There's actually a word for this kind of tune that we associate with a menacing figure like Robo Anakin here. And in music theory, it's called a leitmotif. But if you're anything like me, then you've probably throughout your entire life been referring to it as a theme. Darth Vader's theme in this case. What it is that it's basically a piece of music, or a tune, or a melody that one can associate with like characters, a fictional place, or even entire ideas like home, love, or I don't know, determination. These fancy schmancy leitmotifs have been important in iconic soundtracks like Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, and then of course Star Wars, as you just heard. But in no way has themes ever played as important of a role in film as they have in video games. Because back in the day when gaming was still young, video games and the consoles they were played on were incredibly hindered by their technical limitations, leading to not only the simplification of the music in itself, but also a largely decreased number of tracks possible to put into a single title. But the developers, as smart as they were back in the day, actually used these leitmotifs as a workaround to the issue. They did this by, instead of making a piece of music for every new event or scene like they mostly do in movies nowadays, then characters and places would kind of get anchored to their own theme, like say Dr. Wily's castle theme from Mega Man, or Green Hill Zone from Sonic. And of course, well, I don't really feel the need to say this one. Today we start seeing fewer and fewer of these iconic and bold themes in games, and this is of course mostly because developers aren't hindered or forced to use these methods like they were back in the day. But that also doesn't mean that we shouldn't be using them at all. Because these leitmotifs are actually good at something, and that is making a soundtrack memorable. Let me ask you something. If you were to recall, right now, as many video game soundtracks as possible, wouldn't most of them be old classic tunes or themes? Or maybe even newer indie games that are trying to imitate the retro style? Maybe it's just the chiptune that's memorable, because it's simpler tunes and they're easier to hum or sing? Well, not really, because that wouldn't explain why we remember iconic tunes like the Jurassic Park theme. But it's exactly that. Proper use of themes and leitmotifs can be an extremely useful tool to make a soundtrack memorable by anchoring the music to something in the game universe. And what if I told you that you can actually base your entire musical structure around leitmotifs and make not just a single track, but an entire soundtrack that people will remember? Note, this is very hard to do, but it has been done before, which is why I'm going to analyze and use examples from what is one of my favorite indie games of all time. Welcome to Undertale. You might have heard of it, it was kind of a big deal here a few years ago. Now before you actually click off the video, then I know that this game has received tons of praise, and I'm really sorry if you're tired of hearing about it, but if it helps then I'm going to talk about an often overlooked aspect of it, which is its great use of reoccurring leitmotifs and themes in its musical structure. So let's dig into it. And of course, spoilers in case you haven't played the game. What you're listening to right now is the track called Once Upon a Time. It's quite a simple melody, but in case you didn't already know, then it's a theme. And it's quite an obvious one that you might have noticed in some other tracks if you played the game. This is, in my opinion, the most crucial and impactful theme, along with one other. But since its role is most important near the ending, then I'll reserve my opinion about it until later. The first music that we hear after we get past the intro and Flowey, who by the way also has a very obvious reoccurring theme, is the Ruins theme. This theme is a lot more subtly used throughout the game, and it takes quite the sharp analytic to notice this melody is implemented in tracks leading all the way up to the Undyne fight. Except for maybe the Snowden area, which has its own kind of cutesy town theme to it, and it's also a leitmotif that's reused in game shops, but we don't talk about that. By the way, if you haven't already, then I seriously recommend listening to like all of the Undertale music and listen for comparisons now that you have this information. The similarities will be almost blindingly obvious. Anyway, who are we talking about? Oh right, Undyne. Did you know that this is actually not Undyne's theme? Her theme is the track called Undyne. This makes quite a lot of sense if you think about it, because this is not only the track that plays during her first appearance, but it's her most neutral melody that's implemented in all of her tracks. Her battle music, of course, being an extremely exaggerated version of her theme, which fits her unchecked and tempered personality. But in her Battle Against a True Hero track, it's different. It's more honed and finessed, and it's got a very serious, somber feeling to it. And I'm guessing this is to represent the hero being strained into not just fighting with rage, but also focus and everything else she's got. And knowing this makes the track a lot more powerful, in my opinion. The only piece of Undyne's music that doesn't include this theme is adorably enough in the track She Plays Piano, where you can hear Undyne poorly attempting to play Alpha's theme inside her house, which is a really cute little foreshadowing. Moving on, then after Undyne we start seeing a repeat of the pattern with the Ruins track, except now it's the Hotland theme that starts making cameos in most tracks leading all the way up to the Mettaton boss fight. Oh, and in case you want a much deeper explanation of all of this, then I highly recommend you check out Essays on Music by Jason MU. They made an entire 2-part essay explaining pretty much everything, and they have audio files for all of it. I feel like I'm almost just ripping them off and simplifying everything they wrote, so seriously, I'll leave a link in the description for you to check out. But back to the analysis. After the Mettaton fight and Alpha's final speech, we really start feeling the build-up as we get closer to the end. But then suddenly, we find ourselves in this strange, yet familiar place called New Home. New Home is special because it's the final area before what the player believes to be the final boss of the game, and this is the track that plays. It's a mix of Once Upon a Time and another really impactful track called Memory, the one that you heard and likely relaxed to for a somber moment if you've solved the piano puzzle in Waterfall. These two tracks have come to musically represent Undertale, so I find it very fitting that the name of the track is also the same as the title of the game. Because this is where everything starts feeling tied up. It's come full circle. We started with Once Upon a Time, and now we're also ending with it, but a version that feels more fulfilled. And then, after our judgment, we confront the final boss room with a feeling of determination. We get one final salute and an introduction to Asgore's theme with the Bergentrocken track, and then the end begins. This may be more of an unpopular opinion, but I think this is the best boss in the normal or even the pacifist playthrough. Not only does the soundtrack of course consist of some Artorias theme, but it also cameos the Determination track or the Game Over screen, where Asgore's voice can be heard giving short motivational speeches. This is great, because I feel like it tips you off to the fact that Asgore is just as iron-willed as you, and that the only way you could possibly win is through actual combat. So you do that. You kill him, and after that the game would be over. Unless you decided to stay, because if you do, then Flowey will get in the way and won't let you have this compromised happy ending. So you face him in an unfair, intense, fourth wall breaking duel where his evil, intimidating theme and his almost teasing and mischievous theme will combine and switch and grow more desperate throughout the battle. But you will eventually conquer Flowey's challenge and spare him, only for him to come back and screw you over once more, as he finally turns into the final boss of the pacifist playthrough, Asriel. The music for this boss is amazingly epic, and Toby Fox definitely intended this, seeing it's the only track of the game that gets to surpass the chiptune completely and turn into a full-blown psychedelic rock fest. Not only that, but it's a combination of Once Upon a Time and Flowey's theme, which is really fitting seeing as it's the starting theme that's showing up for this absolute blast of an ending. But of course, we can't leave off without the music coming full circle again like the Undertales track. And after this, after the odd and very menacing boss music of Asriel's final form, we get introduced to his theme, literally. This is probably the emotional peak for most players in this game. Asriel's past unfolds before you as the lonely music box tune turns into an amazing and almost orchestral track that lasts to the boss fight's end. And then, after hugs and comfort has been exchanged, we get to the ending credits, which we don't talk about that because there's too many themes involved, and I don't even wanna start going through them, so we skip past that. But after the credits, we're left with a goodbye theme followed by the memory music box. So that's Undertale's musical structure. And I think I made my point that the game is almost made of leitmotifs and reoccurring themes. Does this mean that as a developer then you should follow Undertale's soundtrack decisions down to the wire just to create something good and memorable? No, absolutely not. The reason that I even used Undertale as an example is just because it's really bold and rich with its themes, and therefore it's easier for me to analyze and look for leitmotifs and show how they work and sound in action. You really don't need every single track to count and hook your player. If you're too hard on this, then it might even backfire and you could potentially risk your music becoming obnoxious or distracting. Even though it's background music, it's supposed to be in the background and complement the interactive experience. What I'm trying to tell you is that the music you hear in video games are rarely separate, unrelated music pieces that you just jam together in something you play. There's structure to it, and there's many ways to establish that structure, but using leitmotifs and themes is an interesting and, in my opinion, underrated way to make your game stand out from the rest in people's minds. Once again, if you're really interested in hearing more about the topic and even more about Undertale, then check out the link in the description. The essay goes way more in depth about how these techniques are implemented and used in the game. Hopefully I still managed to teach you something new about video games so you can run off and be like a real fancy smancy game designer when you mention motifs and leitmotifs to your friends. And hopefully we'll all be able to in the future experience more amazing moments, meet more lovable or hateable characters, and explore more absurd and crazy worlds, and know exactly what piece of music represents them. Thank you all so much for watching, thank you all so much for being patient till the very end, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.